Lawyers of Reddit, what's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on, and did you? I'm a personal injury lawyer in the UK. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority as her home was owned by the council and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected, she was told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Man, some people really like to divert blame. Not really stupid, but unbelievable. My friend at work, his girlfriend filed for divorce a few weeks ago. That's right, they aren't married, and common law doesn't apply in Washington state. They lived together for 5 years. She has a job, she isn't on the mortgage, and she left him a few months ago. There were no kids involved. They were never engaged. In the divorce, she wants him to leave his house, and she wants to move back in. She wants him to pay her $2,800 a month for some reason. I referred him to my divorce attorney, and now that attorney is probably going to represent him. The chick is nuts. She already had tried to get a restraining order against him that was dismissed. You know, I hear about a lot of very frivolous lawsuits, people just trying to throw something out in hopes that they can get some money. But doesn't it also just cost a lot of money to start a lawsuit like this? I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident PI claim. He had written a poem in Yoruba about the incident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing. In Yoruba. Among other problems, I can't even speak Yoruba, as in not one word, as in that day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language. I'm really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy, who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to go on with it so he can talk about his claim. He does. It takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I'll take his case on now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to screw off and stop wasting my time. He does, but not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so, reading out his poem, to no one in particular, over and over again, in Yoruba. Man, I think that this is a little bit more than a language barrier. This is an entire language wall. A client wanted to sue because there was no strawberries in her fruit salad, which she bought from a supermarket. Thankfully, a secretary was able to screen the call. She asked if the package said it had strawberries, and the response was, "No, but I thought it would have." I don't know how these people manage to make it through life. I wonder if professionals like this are ever like, how did you even get this number? Without going into too many details, had a guy that wanted to bring a class action against the company that made his underwear, because he was convinced his underwear was the reason he had a crooked dick. He assured us that as soon as the jury saw his dick, they'd side with him. No, we didn't take it. I mean, out of all of the things that you could have come up with, and you thought the underwear was your issue. A lady once called asking us to sue her neighbors. They were using voodoo on her. Fortunately, she had psychic powers, and thus knew what they were doing. I respectfully declined. Yes, when it comes to the neighborhood battles between the wizards and the witch doctors, just let them battle it out themselves. We don't need to get involved. I was working in a law firm and got a call from a reception advising that someone had arrived needing some intellectual property advice. I arrived at reception to find a clearly disturbed woman with a persistent facial twitch and a small wheeled suitcase. I took her to a conference room to discuss, making sure I kept a good line of sight to reception. She put the suitcase on the table and opened it to reveal a stack of thousands of handwritten pages and one half of a pair of scissors. So I guess a scissor? She explained that she had written a manuscript about how the city council gave her schizophrenia and hepatitis. Aliens stole her pets, and that it was all part of a bigger conspiracy involving the army and the Illuminati. She was worried that our local newspaper was going to steal her thoughts and publish her manuscript without her consent, and wanted to register the copyright in her manuscript. We then had a perfectly rational and reasonable discussion about copyright laws. I explained that in our jurisdiction she didn't need to register it, and that she had the rights as an author automatically on creation of her work. I told her the most useful thing she could do was ensure that she had evidence of her creative work, and that she should send a digital copy to herself and a friend, and also leave a copy with a friend. That way, if it was published without her consent, she could prove it was her work. We spoke for nearly an hour. She thanked me and left. She got free legal advice, and I didn't get stabbed with a scissor. I hope she found the help she needs. You know, I have to wonder just how much a psychiatrist and a lawyer's jobs start to overlap at some point. I once represented a guy who was denied unemployment benefits after being fired from his job as a jizz mopper at an adult video store for sexual harassment. I won. Man, sexual harassment in a place revolving around sex? Who could have seen that coming? My father is a patent attorney, and when I was around 14, he told me about a guy who wanted to patent the iPhone 3 because aliens had given him the design for it. My father told him that if the aliens originally designed, then they were the ones who had the patent to it, not him. Well, he does have a point there. A guy found a rock in the middle of Melbourne's CBD that he believed came from an underground volcano. Therefore, he discovered the volcano, and he owned the volcano, and that the Melbourne City Council and indeed the Victorian government should pay him rent to live on top of his underground volcano. No, I did not take on that case. Yeah, well, the whole finders keepers precedent kind of ended a few hundred years ago. I run a consumer advocacy firm. I had a client come in and tell me that he bought a product, and the company refused to honor the warranty after the product broke. I asked for the details, and he just started screaming in my face, asking if I was going to take his money or not. I decided then that I wasn't taking him on as a client, but I wanted to know what was going on. I convinced him to tell me what happened. Turns out he bought a computer back in the 1990s, and it had just recently died, but not because it was old and just stopped working. It was slow, so he picked it up and threw it out a 2-story window, and then he wanted to sue the manufacturer for breaking warranty. Will you just show me any sticker on that computer that says that if you drop it out of a 2-story window that voids the warranty? I'll wait. A lawyer for 12 years, client was charged with stealing a mobile toilet. After we won, he told me he still owns it. The dude has the thing in his backyard because he was so lazy. His office was nearby. I forced him to deliver it back at night. I'm still offended that he lied to me the whole time. See, I'm not really one to follow like court drama or anything like that, and I understand that if there's somebody convicted of a crime, they're guaranteed to have a lawyer appointed to them, but I just have to wonder, like, what does a lawyer do when they have to defend somebody that is so obviously guilty? Like, what do you even say? My dad is an in-house lawyer for a major American insurance company. He once spent an entire year trying to help deny insurance benefits for a painter who had stepped off his ladder onto a cat, fallen down the stairs and become paralyzed. The insurance company was arguing that a cat was a commonly expected occupational hazard for a painter, and that he was negligent in not checking for cats before stepping down. A whole year of his life over whether a cat is a known occupational hazard of house painting. Man, I had no idea cats were so dangerous to be around. Though I guess I have tripped over Faye a few times. The guy who cut off all his fingers would be a serious contender. He clearly had some really awful mental illness. I assumed schizophrenia or psychosis, but I never really found out what his deal was. Anyway, he had decided one evening that a good way to get some money would be to break into a butcher shop and use a meat saw to cut all of his fingers and both thumbs off at the knuckles, which is pretty much exactly what he did. He was found the next morning, somehow having survived. He was put in a mental health facility and made a pretty much full, albeit fingerless, recovery. Anyway, he wanted to sue someone. He didn't really know who he wanted to sue. He had just gotten it into his head that if he was injured, he would get a compensation. I remember his biggest question was whether he would get more money if he went back and cut off his feet too. Yeah, well, I mean, if you slip on ice on somebody's sidewalk, it's their responsibility. So if you chop off all your fingers with somebody else's butcher knife, it's their responsibility. It's all the same. I never did much criminal defense, but a man who we'll call Dennis came into my office with the driving while intoxicated charge and an aggressive unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle charge. Both misdemeanors. Dennis swore up, down, and sideways that 1, he does not drink and was not intoxicated, 2, he never drove the vehicle, and 3, that he had a valid driver's license. So I give Dennis the names of some local criminal defense and DWI attorneys and suggest he try them out. Dennis refuses, saying I'm the lawyer he wants. In hindsight, I should have realized that he probably had already gone to those other attorneys and only came to me after they refused to take his case. I charged the guy $200 for an intake and record review fee and contact the local court, police station, and district attorney's office for information and paperwork. I find out that not only did this guy blow a .18 on the breathalyzer, but the cops did a blood test on him after he kept insisting he wasn't drunk. The blood test came back with a .22 BAC. As for driving, the separate squad cars witnessed Dennis's vehicle run over a mailbox and drive off. He was followed and pulled over on the block. Per the police report, Dennis was the only person in the car and was in the driver's seat with the seatbelt on. Oh, and I tracked down the license through the DMV, and it had expired 3 years ago and was suspended for 2 years prior to that. I called Dennis back into my office and told him that he did not have a case that should be taken to trial. Dennis admitted that he probably had been drunk, but he wasn't aware he had been drinking. His son must have put Fireball whiskey in his green tea, and he didn't realize there was whiskey in his green tea, because he was eating red hot cinnamon candies and had a cold and stuffy nose. Anyways, Dennis retains me, but only after I put a clause in his engagement agreement stating that I explained his low chance at trial and he understood there was no guarantee of a win. I take the case to trial, and of course we lose. I was hoping to convince Dennis to take one of the plea offers given to us in advance, but absolutely not. Dennis was sure the judge would understand. Dennis wanted a bench trial, not a jury trial. I made him sign another document later on that said he understood the differences between a bench and a jury trial, and he was opting for the bench trial, and would be found not guilty, and everyone would move on. He was sorely disappointed, but only got probation after trial. I think the judge was taking pity on me more than Dennis. Dennis later sued me for his retainer because I didn't adequately defend him. As proof of my inadequate representation, he offered the judge's verdict rendering him guilty. The case was thrown out quickly. You know, I feel like some people just don't really understand the purpose of a lawsuit. It's just like anytime anything doesn't go their way, well, maybe a lawsuit will fix that. But it obviously doesn't help when there's so many idiots that make millions of dollars off of the stupidest lawsuits ever. A woman wanted me to sue McDonald's because their employees beat up her son, who was trying to rob the place. You know, based on some lawsuits I've heard of, that wouldn't be too far-fetched if she actually won that. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a friend of mine. He got engaged, and apparently that pissed off his ex-girlfriend. The ex-girlfriend sued him for custody of their 2 cats, and $500,000 for something like the lost value of the cats, because she claimed that they were service animals. Hint, they were not at all service animals. Wow, $500,000 for 2 cats, is that the going rate right now? I only paid like $80 for Faye. I did insurance defense for a long time, including insurance fraud investigations for insurance companies. You wouldn't believe how many people take a video inventory of their house, only to have it mysteriously burned down the next day. You really can't fix stupid. It's like that old joke of somebody talking to the insurance person and he's just like, doesn't it seem a little weird that they bought insurance the day before their place burned down? And he says, no, it's not that weird, it happens all the time. I'm a prosecutor, so I don't get hired to represent anyone. I work for the government, but I do have a discretion over how the prosecution progresses, like deciding to proceed, deciding what to offer in the event of a plea bargain, deciding to withdraw the charges. I had a case a few months ago where a man was charged with shoplifting. Turns out he was 70 years old, had absolutely no criminal record, and had shoplifted a sandwich, which he ate politely in the store. He honestly thought he had paid for it. I was so angry that he was ever charged in the first place. When I saw him in court, he was absolutely terrified. I withdrew the charges and wished him well. I have no idea how it progressed that far. Well, you know, sometimes cops are just having a slow day and they're just looking for something to do. Let me preface this. I had heard about the guy I'm going to mention below before I had actually met him. I thought this was an urban legend until he came into my office one day. So a guy in his late 50s, early 60s comes into the lobby area of my office and starts a commotion that freaks out the receptionist. I was the closest attorney to the lobby, so I go out and talk to the guy. He was clearly mentally disturbed and presented the following story. Someone had implanted a device in his brain that was controlling his behavior. He believed it was being controlled by Baskin-Robbins and a former mayor of Detroit. He believed they were forcing him to do random things like going to bars to drink, taking the wrong turn when driving, forcing him to retire from his job, and a lot of other very intricate things. After asking him if he had seen any doctors regarding the implant, he got really upset and said that he thought the doctors were in on it as well. After telling him I could not help him and suggest that he find some new doctors, he asked me if I knew any lawyers who specialized in this kind of case. I often wonder if the lawyer I referred him to was able to help him. I mean, are there lawyers that specialize in helping schizophrenic people sue the demons in their heads? I had a client come in saying that he needed to sue Stu for robbing all his checks. When I asked him if Stu had a last name, he said no. When I asked him if he knew any Stu, he said no. When I asked him what proof he had that Stu was robbing him, he showed me all his pay stubs. There were clear monthly deductions by SCU. As soon as I saw it, I knew. I asked, "Do you have children?" He said yes. I then told him, "Your Stu is the SCU, the Support Collection Unit. They take money out of your check to pay for your child." He left the office, insisting that we needed to find Stu. Well, man, just keep looking. Once you find him, come back and we'll figure something out. One prospective client wanted me to sue Burger King for no longer serving pancakes. Well, if he ends up winning the case, tell him to sue IHOP next. I can't believe they discontinued their stuffed French toast. That's like the only thing I ever got there. A lady in prison in my state tried to sue the State Department of Corrections for holding her against her will. Her lawyer wouldn't touch it. Yeah, kinda weird that prison does that to people. I had a teacher that worked for a major video game publisher, one of the top 10 ones. He told me that when people tried to sue them for small amounts due to some game being bad, they would just pay whatever the person wanted. It was cheaper than dealing with the country's terrible justice system. Except one day a guy sued them because a game was bad. He was a law student, self-representing, and tried to throw the book at the company. They decided to make an exception for this guy. They instead threw the book back at him. The lawsuit kept escalating until both sides wasted lots of time and money. Then, as a final stroke, they offered to settle in front of a judge. There in front of the judge, they put the price of the game on the table in cash, and told the guy to just take it and stop bothering them. The judge thought it was very fair, and told the guy that if he refused that settlement he would be fined. The guy was very unhappy. He had spent like $5,000 in bureaucracy and airplane fares just to get $60. Aren't lawsuits fun? Well, I guess that's all for these lawsuit stories. You might notice that I don't usually upload on these days, but I want to try and upload at least 5 days a week for the rest of the year. So we'll see if I can keep up with that. There's going to be a lot more of me coming.